Aloha mai ka. Want to welcome everyone to our 11th Maui Nui Makai Network Speaker Series. Tonight we'll have Opihi Talk. So to get it started, I'll go ahead and give a pule, and then I'm going to hand it over to Tate for us to open this evening. So e pule kako. Our dear Father, as we bow our heads before thee this day, we thank thee for the many blessings that thou hast bestowed upon us. We ask thee, please forgive us for our shortcomings and weaknesses, and help us through our many trials and tribulations. We ask thee this evening to support our speakers as they share their love for Opihi, and to educate those that have joined us this evening, for both near and far. We ask thee for those that have joined us with open minds to enjoy this series, and also to be able to learn and engage in our series and this network. And we ask thee for these many blessings in the name of thy son, Jesus Christ, amen. And I'll hand it over to Tate. Mahalo nui.
Aloha mai kako. Mahalo maile for opening. My name is Tate, and I get to introduce tonight's speaker series. Very exciting, our 11th episode of our Mālama I Ke Kai speaker series. And before I hand the floor off to our speakers, I just want to introduce Maui Nui Makai Network and what the speaker series is. And so the network is made up of 8 community groups across Maui Nui and 4 supporting organizations. Our mission is to connect communities across Maui Nui to care for and restore healthy ecosystems in Hawaii that people depend on here in Hawaii, right? And our purpose is to share and learn from our diverse experiences, lessons, and best practices to help member sites care for Makai areas. And so the Mālama I Ke Kai speaker series has been our latest effort to inspire and inform Hawaii community leaders, and is a companion to our Mālama I Ke Kai community action guide released in 2020. And so the topics explored have included case studies and experiences of Indigenous and local communities, management of marine areas, co-management, replenishment and protected area planning, and community engagement, and much more. So the speaker series is held every third Thursday of each month, and it's free to the public. So please mark your calendars for future ones to be coming out, and let everyone know about them so that they can come online and listen to these awesome speakers. And lastly, before we get started, we'll have just our Zoom etiquette. If you guys can stay muted for the speaker series or for the presentation, and then we'll do a Q&A afterwards. So if you do have questions, you can just put them in the chat and we'll get to them afterwards. And then lastly, just to introduce our speakers for tonight, they'll be both community members and scientists in dual efforts of protecting our Opihi. And we'll be hearing first from Scott Crawford, who's the Executive Director of Kīpahulu for the last 20 years. And he also helps to manage Kapahu Living Farm, which is a traditional wetland taro farm. Kīpahulu Kitchen and Mālama I Ke Kai program, including the Opihi Rest Area and the proposed Kīpahulu Moku community-based subsistence fishing area. Then we have Uncle Hank Eharis, born and raised in Hāna and lives in Koali. And Uncle Hank works at Haleakalā National Park Resources Management and is currently the president of the Mamo Mūʻolea, who enjoys fishing and hunting. And then we have Dr. Chris Bird, who's been working with East Maui community since 2008. Dr. Bird's also currently the professor of biology at Texas A&M University. And then lastly, we have Miss Emily Fielding, who is the Maui Marine Program Director of the Nature Conservancy since 2007. And Emily's led TNC's Maui Nui Marine work, specializing in planning and community engagement for marine resource management. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Scott, who will start our presentation.
All right, mahalo Tate for the introductions, and thank you everybody for joining us for a little talk story about Opihi for this evening. And I'll start off by just giving a little bit of overview of our presentation, and then go into some sort of basic background about Opihi life cycle. you know, the theme of this evening's presentation is We Love Opihi. And yeah, well, I'll talk a little bit about the life history, biology, ecology. We'll talk about the history of the Opihi partnership and how the communities and scientists came together to work, and the success of the rest areas, and then where we are now moving forward, and the Kīpahulu CBSFA. So that's a basic overview of what we'll cover this evening. The area that we're talking about is East Maui, the Mokus of Hāna and Kīpahulu. And our purpose of all our efforts is to make more Opihi. More Opihi, make more Opihi. So the purpose of everything that we're trying to do is, like, we love Opihi means we love to eat Opihi and we love to pick Opihi. But we also love to protect Opihi and get to know Opihi so that there's plenty for everybody to be able to eat and pick and eat in the future as well. So we're definitely not telling anybody don't pick Opihi, just we're trying to put some things in place that help us to make sure that they're there for future generations. Some basic Opihi facts and interesting sort of overview. There's 3 different species of Opihi in the Hawaiian Islands. The Makaya uli, or Blackfoot, which lives mostly in the splash zone. The Alina lina, or Yellowfoot, which lives kind of in the limu zone or the pink algae zone. That's the most desirable for eating. And then the Koali, which lives underneath the water in the submarine zone. And Opihi are really valued in Hawaiian culture as a part of the diet that's very important for nutrition, and it's an important part of luau cuisine, a delicacy for graduations, baby luaus and things like that. So it's really a prized food source, which is why we love it and we want to protect it. The habitat of the Opihi along the intertidal zone includes the papa or bench habitat, the pohaku or boulder beach habitat, and the pali or cliff face habitat. And so little interesting facts about the Opihi. They have what's called a radula, which is kind of like a serrated tongue that they use to scrape the microscopic algae off of the rocks, and they help to actually clean the rocks and keep the algae from sort of overgrowing, and also make space for other invertebrates and life there in the intertidal zone. They have what's called a home scar, which each Opihi will move around within a fairly small area to feed, but they go back to the same spot that you can see on the rock that's called their home scar. And they have predators. There's predator snails, which are different varieties of the poo-poo snails that are will actually drill holes in the Opihi shells and eat the Opihi. And this is on the photo on the right, shows an Opihi extending its mantle up as high as it can to try to knock off one of these predator snails that they can smell as soon as they come close to them. The life history of the Opihi basically starts with the adults that spawn and put eggs and sperm into the water. There are male and female Opihi, and when the eggs and sperm are in the water, then the eggs get fertilized and they float around for a few days and grow through these different stages. And then after about 4 days, they end up, the lucky ones end up getting splashed back onto the rocks and become settlers. And about 4 days later, they are recruits. And then from there, they grow into baby Opihi and juveniles at about 2 months. And then by 6 to 8 months, they're back at the reproductive stage again. And the Opihi generally spawn around the new moon every month, and the new moon closest to the summer solstice seems to be sort of the mass spawning event. Also the winter solstice, but around the solstices is when they sort of have their mass spawning event. So that'll be coming up next month. And you know, part of the reason why we got into wanting to protect Opihi is because of Opihi fishery decline that has been evident over, you know, actually looking at the upper left, you can see these two dots on the far left side of this upper quadrant here, all the way from like 1900 and 1905 records of Opihi fisheries and how much was being harvested. And then you bring that forward into the modern day and you see how relatively little there are today. Then like the lower right graph, it shows you the, you know, Opihi on Oahu are almost completely wiped out. It's, you know, really hard to find an Opihi there. And once they go below a certain critical mass, then they have a hard time reproducing, and they don't really cross channels. So each island generates its own, you know, Opihi population. And so that's why it's important that as Maui, you see, is sort of moving towards that red zone, and we want to make sure that it doesn't get any further in that direction. It moves back towards the green zone. So with that, I'll hand it over to Chris. Oh, I mean, Hank, sorry. I'll hand it over to Hank.
Thanks, Scott. Hello, everyone. My name is Hank. I'm with Mamo Mūʻolea. We're speaking about the history of our beginnings with the Opihi project. So in 2007, Mamo Mūʻolea, the subcommittee within the board that dealt with the marine and nearshore line resources identified Opihi, limu, and the nearshore fish species as resources that we wanted to Mālama. In 2008, with the help of the Nature Conservancy, Maui group, and also along with other partnering agencies, we all had invitation to go to Kaho'olawe and again further our mana'o and exchange ideas on why the decline was happening, and then eventually created a method of how we was gonna monitor Opihi. That's where the chain method and first was developed and started. Soon after, we had brought the program back to Hāna, along with our partners and community members. That's where our partnership had formed. And soon after, with the new partnership formed, we all took the method and surveys to Mūʻolea, and that was the initial start of everything. Within that chain transect method is created, basically is a form of transect that runs perpendicular to the shoreline from the dry land down to the wet or the splash zone of the shoreline. Ranges sometimes to a 30-meter chain that is placed perpendicular to the water, and then all species within a 2-meter swath of the chain being the center was counted, measured, and collected as data per each transect established. Along with all the Opihi, the 3 different species, other invertebrates and animals that live on the coast, the shoreline, was also counted, including limu, which was the main food source for all of our species on our shoreline. Okay. Community participation with during the annual surveys, Mamo Mūʻolea invites the local youth groups from Hāna, also nonprofit groups that was eager to come out and help us with our surveys. We continue to create the relationships within the Hāna community and the outer island communities. Mamo Mūʻolea continued to build relationship with the Nature Conservancy and also Dr. Chris Bird from University of Hawaii. We got the invite to go up to the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, Papahanao Moku Akea, for Opihi surveys done there and further define the method of the chain transect monitoring for Opihi. At least approximately 6 years, we had invited members of the Mamo Mūʻolea and Kīpahulu ʻOhana to assist the monument NOAA folks and Fish and Wildlife to conduct surveys there. Mūʻolea also went off island, again invited by the Nature Conservancy on the Big Island. Representative Chad Wiggins had invited Mamo to bring the surveys to the Kaupulehu community. And so forth, all those years prior to or after 2008, we've done the surveys all the way up to the 2013, 14. And that's when the rapid surveys actually was applied to the rest area, Mūʻolea Rest Area. 2014 was the year that Mūʻolea had put into play the rest area for Opihi. And rapid survey method is continued to be used on the surveys going forward. At this time, we'll move on to, or pass it on to Chris Bird.
Chris.
Somebody muted me. Sorry. My role in the project has been to support community goals, and we let the community drive the science here. And so the communities that we work with identify the things that they're interested in working out. I can provide that expert consultation and ensure that we employ methods to answer the questions that are sound and will stand up to scrutiny from others. And so we started this in 2008, and it's continuing through to today. I'm going to pass it on to Emily Fielding.
Hi, everybody. The Nature Conservancy has had several roles in this project. One role has been to connect communities to the scientists, tools, and resources they need to effectively manage Opihi and other species, and then to help coordinate efforts. Also, with long-term relationships in mind, we co-developed data sharing principles and memorandums of understanding between ourselves, Dr. Bird, Mamo Mūʻolea, Kīpahulu, and other partners. Next slide. Another role has been the development of outreach materials. We worked with partners to design signs, posters, t-shirts, organize outreach events, or help to staff community outreach events, and help to arrange for partner presentations at conferences. Interestingly, the process we use to develop the agreements between community groups and researchers is documented in the Maui Nui Makai Network's Mālama I Ke Kai Community Action Guide. If you're interested in activity 4.2, Mālama I Ke, developing and honoring mutually beneficial relationships. We have more work to do together to ensure that we and future generations can continue to enjoy eating ʻOpihi, but we can do that because of our mutual investment in and prioritization of our relationships. Over to you, Hank.
Thank you, Emily. So in 2004, Mamo Mūʻolea designates the section of shoreline in Mūʻolea as our rest area for ʻOpihi. This area is highly accessible by all visitors and highly visible to whoever that comes there. During that initial placement of the rest area, signages and design and wording of it, help define the intention that we're putting on. And this also was coordinated and discussed and produced by also the Nature Conservancy, helping help us create the word. Opihi Rest Area didn't sound very intrusive to the public that came there. It wasn't about not having anybody pick ʻOpihi, but just to look at this area and recognize that this is Mamo Mūʻolea's intention, is to just a little part of the shoreline to be a rest area for the ʻOpihi, and made the signages, the design, the drawings, very appealing and not as aggressive to the normal public. And there it shows the ʻOpihi laying back and resting and enjoying his life, So this particular area is also this for the kupunas, if they wanted to see this place, a place where ʻOpihi was generated, and they can refer to it and reminisce about their past and how it was for them. Moving on to community outreach, Mamo Mūʻolea and the Nature Conservancy create posters, created shirt designs. At one point, there was a huge donation by the Patagonia organization, presenting us with a shipment of t-shirts. So along with the Nature Conservancy and Mamo, we've created the design and is used in our project, during ʻOpihi surveys. I think it was a great blessings to have that incorporated into our project. Along with that, we have signages in the kiosk that talk about and create awareness of the species itself and what we can do better to carry on, Mālama, the ʻOpihi. And there's one flyer that shows, a lot of it, the information that we're trying to promote. And also we've taken the program to our annual Limo Festival. We've been doing the annual Limo survey for at least 10 years now, and we've gotten good review. The whole festival is about Limo, but then it is also about the species that live off of the algae and the Limo population. Without it, I think we don't have a sustainable shoreline. We've entered and did awareness in the Hawaii Conservation Conference. we've met up with key people like Nainoa Thompson and passed on our mana'o as to what our projects were, and wanting, we gave him support because he was on the biggest project, and that was to Mālama Honua. So all in all, it's a great experience. And at this time, I think pass it on to Chris, Dr. Chris Bird, or Scott Crawford.
Thanks, Hank. We keep trying to hand it to Chris. Thanks for sharing about Mūʻolea. And I will share a little bit about the Kīpahulu Rest Area and our efforts in Kīpahulu. The Kīpahulu Opihi Rest Area was established in late 2014, about 6 months after the Mūʻolea Rest Area, as kind of a sister project. And they're sort of the 2 points that you can see across from each other. And it's the shoreline adjacent to Haleakalā National Park, basically from the mouth of Ohio Gulch to Kukui Bay, a distance of about a little over 1,700 meters. And next slide. It's adjacent to the campground, as you can see there. And so in order to help create awareness, all of this is, as Hank said, this is all voluntary. It's about, getting the word out so people understand the rest area. And so we also put up signs there at the access point, working along with Haleakalā National Park to put up signage at the access points to the shoreline there from the campground, and then also made an Opihi poster that is in the kiosk at the campground there. And I did want to highlight this section, which is on both of the Mūʻolea and Kīpahulu posters, which is this best practices for picking Opihi outside of the rest area, which was developed based on traditional practices from East Maui, Opihi pickers, and said this is the way that we do it to be pono and make sure that we don't overharvest. Basically, briefly, it's communicating with other families and not going to the same area after somebody else has already been there. Don't pick too many. Opihi don't reproduce in the freezer, so just take what you need. The size is 1.25 inches is the state regulations for Opihi, but also leave the really big ones because they are the prime spawners that reproduce more eggs and healthier eggs. Keep moving, pick from different areas, and then respect the koele. Don't pick the koele which are underneath the water line. And if we follow these practices along with the rest area, then that gives the best chance for the Opihi to survive. And again, this is all about voluntary compliance to this point, about education and about really doing outreach so that the Opihi, people who want to pick Opihi understand the reason and the benefit of the rest area and respect it, because they know that, not picking in the rest area and following the best practices will ensure that there's Opihi for their children and grandchildren to pick in the future. And in Kīpahulu, like Mūʻolea, we've really emphasized educational partnerships and getting community members and community groups, and especially school kids, involved with the monitoring and the surveys. This is from last year, the sophomore science class from Hāna High out doing a survey day with us in Kīpahulu and learning about the Opihi Rest Area and about the survey methods as part of their science curriculum with Bree, the science teacher. And one of the things that's really important is that, well, our focus is on ʻOpihi because they are prized as, you know, a delicacy and an important part of the culture and the diet. We also see them as kind of a charismatic creature that is, while we're out studying the ʻOpihi and counting the ʻOpihi, we're also observing the rest of the intertidal ecosystem and what else is in relationship and how healthy is the limu and, you know, what other invertebrates are there, the pupu and the other snails and the haukeauke, the different types of limu. And so it's a way, while we're out on the shoreline counting and measuring the ʻOpihi and doing the science, we're also just observing and talking about, you know, it's an opportunity to have conversations about, you know, being involved in shoreline management and how does the community need to be proactive in protecting and managing the whole ecosystem, not just the ʻOpihi. Excuse me. One thing that, you know, is interesting to note is that during this pandemic period, we kind of had a natural rest period where there was, you know, we know even though we have a rest area, because the Kīpahulu area is next to the National Park campground, that it's very accessible to the public and that there's still people who pick there even though it is a rest area. So having some of the pressure taken off has a benefit, even if there's not 100% compliance. But the pandemic and the National Park campground being shut down for a couple of years really provided a window into kind of what it would look like if the pressure is really taken off for a period of time. And what we saw was a lot more, you know, just observationally, a lot more ʻOpihi on the much larger size scale, getting up to, you know, 5 and even 6 centimeters, that normally you wouldn't see very many like that. And but when they're given the chance to really develop and mature, then these are also going to be highly reproductive ʻOpihi that really help to ensure the next generation. And I'm now going to turn it back. Now we're going to turn it over to Chris.
If you want to keep going, Scott, you can go with it.
This one's all yours.
Okay, so the big question is, did the rest areas work? And the answer is yes, they did. The rest areas definitely make more ʻOpihi. In the graphic here, each circle is the account of the number of ʻOpihi inside one ʻAnana or arm length or arm span. And you can see there's a lot of circles there. So we did a lot of counts of ʻOpihi, and that all added up to, from the start of the rest areas at the left of the graphic to 4 years into the rest areas at the right of the graphic, there was a 44% increase in the number of ʻOpihi at the Mūʻolea rest area. Next figure. Now, I don't want to show you, 20 more of these types of figures. So what I did was made this summary figure in the upper right, where a bar that's positive means that there was a positive increase. All right, and you can see that the ones with stars, there was a significant positive increase. So the rest area is there in the middle, and that matches the graphic on the left. And then at 100 meters outside of the rest area, there was more ʻOpihi growth than inside of the rest area. So rest areas weren't just contributing to more ʻOpihi inside the rest areas, it was also contributing to more ʻOpihi outside the rest areas, even at a kilometer down current from those rest areas. And that's Mūʻolea. We'll go to the next slide. What about Kīpahulu? We see the same pattern. Inside the rest area, for the most part, we have 5 different locations that we surveyed where we saw an increase in the amount of ʻOpihi. And down current from the rest area at a kilometer, we saw increases in the ʻOpihi population there also. So again, a replicated pattern of increases in the abundance of ʻOpihi that can be connected to the rest areas. Next slide. All right, so now we're going to move on to some genetic data that we collected. Each of the squares is a location where we collected 50 adults and 50 juvenile ʻOpihi. The white areas have no Opihi protection, and the yellow areas have some Opihi protection. So they're over in East Maui. Those are our East Maui rest areas. And I want to specifically point out the Mūʻolea rest area and the Ahikina'u rest areas, where they had a disproportionate contribution to the baby Opihi that were landing on the shores of South Maui. And then in contrast, Kahului, where you can see circled up there, it had, it was more of a sink. It had no contribution at all. Basically, if Opihi go to Kahului, they're not coming back. So it's not exactly a great place for a rest area. Okay, next. Now this graphic goes along with the map, and the graphic's not as easy to interpret, but when you see those bars above 0, so I circled in red, that is the Mūʻolea rest area there. And then over at the very far right, that's Ahikina'u rest area. So now Ahikina'u has been in place for about 50 years. And that rest area at Mūʻolea was only in place for 3 to 4 years at this point in time. So you can see in a very short amount of time, we have a disproportionate contribution of the adults in these rest areas to the juveniles landing not just a kilometer downshore, but across the whole south shore of Maui. Next slide. Now, this is the culmination of all of that genetic data, and these are dispersal patterns for the Opihi larvae. And this is important for the placement of rest areas and other protected areas in the future to try to increase the Opihi populations. Now, the major thing I want you to pay attention to is that there's a net movement from south to north, which we're pointing out here, and then next. And there's a net movement from east to west. And so if you're wondering what direction are the Opihi larvae going to go in, generally that's the direction they're going to go in. Now, this makes East Maui critically important in the management of Opihi, not just in East Maui, but for the whole island. And what you'll notice is that there are no areas that protect Opihi on the northern shores of Maui, and especially in Hāna and maybe up to Kainai, that area would be critically important for the north shore of Maui. And in this area over here in East Maui, it's the only place where we have any mixing, where there's some net movement from north to south as well as from south to north. Okay, so next. So where are we now? And I'm gonna turn it back over to Scott to talk about the CBSFAs.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Yeah, and so I just wanted to next share a little bit about where we're going, where we are now and where we're going with in Kīpahulu, is that we have are in the process of seeking to have Kīpahulu Moku designated as a community-based subsistence fishing area, or CBSFA. The boundaries are shown there from Kalepa Stream in the southwest to Pu'alu'u Gulch in the northeast, and you can see the Opihi Rest Area is the sort of orange stretch along there. And within the proposed rules for the community-based subsistence fishing area, well, actually, let me just talk about the rest area first. Is this, no, this is like another version of one of the graphs that that Chris showed, but basically that, you know, the rest area is the area in green there. And what we see is up current of the rest area, we see a decrease in the number of Opihi over the study period. But on the lower end of the rest area, as well as 1,000 meters, a kilometer south of the, or it's actually kind of west of the rest area, we ended up having an increase down current that is, you know, a result of that spillover effect from the rest area. So What we're proposing in the Kīpahulu CBSFA is to actually put in place some regulations regarding the harvest of ʻOpihi to help protect them. And what's proposed in the CBSFA is a bag limit of 40 ʻOpihi, which is approximately half-gallon shell on. We're proposing the restriction of no take of ʻOpihi while free diving, which is to protect the koele under the water. No take within the rest area. So basically taking what has been a voluntary rest area and making it an actual sanctuary. And then also proposing a slot limit. The current state regulation is 1.25 inches minimum size, but we also want to add a 2-inch maximum size so that once the ʻOpihi reach that point of being real mature big mamas, then we leave them alone and let them reproduce and really help seed the next generation. And we've been working on the CBSFA proposal for many years, but we're kind of hopefully in the home stretch now. And we do have a scoping meeting coming up on June 7th. So I'd like to invite everybody to come check that out and share any thoughts, Mana'o, you have about the rules that we're proposing, you know, pros or cons, or anything that you want to say about the ʻOpihi, even about the CBSFA proposal. That information is at kipahulu.org/CBSFA. You can go to see the whole proposal and all of the details there. And with that, I think just to, let's see. Now we're going back to Emily. Chris.
Thanks, Scott.
Yes.
So
our transitions are a little rough, but yeah. Okay.
With the success of the rest areas in 2019, our group was reaching out to other communities, especially along that north shore of East Maui, but as well as past Kīpahulu over to Kaupo. And we did some outreach events where we met with the people in the communities, told them what the ʻOpihi surveys are about, talked to them about the results of the rest areas in Mūʻolea and Kīpahulu. And we were primed to really start expanding out. And then COVID brought us to a screeching halt in 2020. But in 2022, in August, we're going to try to start these up again. And we'll be reaching out to communities. I think Emily's going to tell you a little more about that.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so this community-led, just wanted to clarify that my organization and Chris's organizations, we're supporting this community-led East Maui, all of these efforts. So the community's always in the lead. But for this particular East Maui traveling ʻOpihi roadshow that Dr. Bird described, it was prompted in part, well, of course, by the work of Mūʻolea and Kīpahulu, and then in part by the Maui Nui Makai Network's Mālama I Ke Kai community action planning process that began in May 2019 in Kainai, where 4 new communities from East Maui came together to do community Makai planning for their areas. So also, in addition to working on their own plans at that first meeting, representatives from Kaupo, Kīpahulu, Hāna, and Koʻolau drafted this hoʻomau statement, agreeing to work together to ensure an abundance of resources. So you can see the statement here. I'm not going to read it in the interest of time, but hoʻomau means to be constant, to perpetuate. So it's very beautiful. Yes, save the date. As Chris said, Mūʻolea and Kīpahulu are leading other communities to do ʻOpihi monitoring across East Maui and create new community-led rest areas. Or if the rest area is not appropriate, just monitoring to see how the ʻOpihi in that particular area are doing. This effort went on hold with COVID-19 shutdowns. However, we're planning to resume the week of August 6th through 12th at multiple East Maui locations. So save the dates and join us. More details to come. Over to you, Scott.
Okay, thanks, Emily. And just to wrap up with a few concluding thoughts. Well, Kīpahulu, we are seeking to sort of provide regulations within the CBSFA. One of the lessons we've learned is that compliance can be, and successful management can be achieved through guidelines, education, and, community talk story and coconut wireless. Community-led action can have a real effect, and even a relatively small rest area like Mūʻolea can have a measurable impact, not just in the local area, but actually, like Chris was talking about, help seed the entire island. Community involvement and community leadership is the key to the success of achieving sustainable fisheries. We can't wait for the state or some agencies to do this for us. The communities have to take the leadership, and partnership and co-management models are what really makes it work. In this case, we have this Opihi partnership that's just a great relationship between the communities who are leading and driving the project, the supporting the Nature Conservancy in a supporting role Emily talked about in terms of outreach and just coordination, a lot of support, and then working with Dr. Bird and like his graduate students and everything to help us crunch the numbers and answer the questions that we want to answer in a rigorous way that the sort of Western science complements the indigenous science. It's important for Opihi to be managed cohesively across the state because each island does have their own populations, and we hope to be an example in East Maui for practices that maybe can be adopted more broadly. And we want and need to keep eating and loving Opihi and keep taking care of them. So want to make more Opihi, and so that we can enjoy them and let them play their important role in the overall coastal ecosystem. And with that, I think that wraps up our presentation. So I want to thank everybody for listening, and we have about 15 minutes or so that we can open it up for questions and discussion. If anybody wants to share your thoughts or ask a question, you can put it in the chat or just speak up, and Tate can.
I think we have one question in the chat by Heidi, just asking how old and big can an Opihi grow?
That may be a Chris question.
It's a really good question. On the how big can they grow, a Blackfoot or Yellowfoot Opihi can get to be a little bit over 3 inches long in the longest dimension of the shell. The koalas can get much larger though. At the Bishop Museum, there's one that's the size of my hand. I measured it up against it. So that's how big the koalas can get. The age, there's a paper that was published recently by a graduate student at the University of Hawaii, and I can't remember what the conclusion was, but let's say they're not living for 20 years. It's probably like a 5-year time frame that they could probably live up to. Maybe those koalas could live a little longer, maybe up to 10 years.
Interesting. That's awesome.
Can I say to Chris's point about the Opihi being the size of his hand? Samuel Kamakau talked about going to Kaho'olawe in the mid-1800s, and the people that were on Kaho'olawe were very proud because they could cook goat meat in their Opihi. That's the reference that he talks about. Whether that was an exaggeration, we don't know, but at least the size of Chris's hand.
Right, the next question by Bailey for Dr. Bird asks if there's any updates on the results of the genetic surveys and the cryptic species of Opihi Makaiauli.
Okay, yeah, so there's a different, so scientists will argue this, but I'm going to argue that there's two different species of Blackfoot Opihi on Maui. You can see it in my map, the red on the north shore and the blue on the south shore. The reason, the evidence that we have from genetics that they are two different species, and by species I mean two populations that when they interbreed, they don't form viable virile offspring. 50% of all the Blackfoot Opihi that we've surveyed on Maui are F1 hybrids. And if those F1 hybrids were reproductively viable, there'd even be more Opihi that were what we call backcross, when a hybrid mates with a pure strain. Just because there's so many hybrids, there'd have to be even more backcrosses, but there's not. There's almost no backcrosses. So you would see something similar, say, between horses and donkeys. They make mules. And the mules can't backcross very readily. Like maybe every once in a while, you'll find a mule that could successfully mate with a horse or a donkey. That's what's happening with the Blackfoot Opihi on Maui. So that's the latest on that. And I think there's a pretty good chance that the Northwestern Hawaiian Island Blackfoot Opihi are a different species than the two species that we're talking about on Maui. And then we'll have to do more collections to talk about other islands, but Opihi, they're like the honey creepers or the Hawaiian silver swords. They're these, or fruit flies, they're these adaptively radiating species. And while there may not be hundreds of Opihi species, there's probably more than even the 5, I think, that I'm postulating are there right now, and we just need to look with our genetic tools.
And then I think we have Alahalani's raising your hand. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I kind of just wanted to give you guys, I have an Opihi that is the size of my palm. It's pretty big. See that? With a camera there. See how big it is? I mean, yeah, I can cook something in that. But I got this while hunting up in the caves and I found it. So, yep, this was of the old times, just to share. Thank you.
That's awesome. All right, I think we have another question in here. Chris, this one might be for you as well. But does the yellow, by Mavis, the yellow Opihi and the black Opihi, do they grow well together?
Like in a side dish, or?
Great question.
I'm trying to see where the question is. Do they go well together? I think that they have their areas on the shore partitioned out, right? The Yellowfoot has its pink rock area that it likes to live in, and the Blackfoot has its higher area on the shore. And I think they're each happy where they are. I don't know if they really work together very much, but only at the edge of where they occur might they compete with each other.
Chris, is it also true? I mean, I remember from the chain transect surveys, we would find sometimes there would be small areas where both black and yellow co-occur in the same area.
Yeah, that's going to occur anywhere where there's that, overlap in their zones, especially during low wave times. The Blackfoot Opihi can move down to where the Yellowfoot Opihi are, but again, they, it's just at that boundary.
And Mavis, the second part of your question for many areas in East Maui will have all 3 species. Sometimes just 2. The higher koalas aren't as common as the Makaya uli or the ʻāina lina, the yellow and the black.
Yep. On boulder shores, they're more likely to be mixed together. And boulder shores are where you generally find the koalas, right? Something about boulder shores that koalas work, they survive well in there. I think they can hide in the crevices between the boulders to escape from like hi'imanu and things like that. So they can avoid getting eaten.
Now we have a, Scott, a question from you, from Desiree, saying you had said you folks are proposing an Opihi bag limit. Who are you proposing? Oh, I think did you respond to this in the chat? But go ahead.
I kind of answered it in the chat already, but yeah, it's to the Division of Aquatic Resources as part of our CBSFA proposal. So it's to make it an official state rule. It has to go through the Chapter 91 rulemaking process and ultimately to the Board of Natural Land and Resources for the final approval. And it really has taken longer than it should because the state doesn't sort of have the process clearly defined. And, you know, partly we want to make sure that we're really thorough in getting feedback from fishers and making sure it's really well thought through, but it shouldn't take as long as it has. And hopefully Kīpahulu and Miloli'i will be able to kind of puka through and make a path that's easier for other communities to follow, that's more streamlined. And to Bailey's question there, Hāna is the only CBSFA designation so far. Miloli'i actually has a CBSFA designation, but there was never any rules package put to it. So they're going through now the process that's very parallel to Kīpahulu, where they're not seeking the actual designation, but they're seeking approval of their rules package for the CBSFA that's in place. And then Mo'omomi on Molokai is the one that has been going through the process, but kind of got hung up and hasn't gotten to the final stages. So there's those 4. There's one that's in place in Hāna. There's 3 more that are sort of in process, and then there's other communities that are looking at what's happening with Kīpahulu and Miloli'i and hoping to move forward. And to Desiree's question about creating a bag limit without a CBSFA, you know, I think there are other mechanisms to be able to create bag limits, but yeah, and maybe Emily or somebody else has some comment on that. It's something that it may be hard to do area by area without having it be part of a CBSFA or some other kind of fishery management area, but you know, there's also the possibility that we could really talk about something like island-wide or statewide and try to get some bag limits or other kinds of Opihi protection in place.
Yeah, I agree with Scott. You can just do Opihi rules for an area, but you could more likely that the state would take the process on if it was a larger area or an area with more rules, or like, for example, a Maui-wide Opihi rule, or an East Maui-wide Opihi rule, or a statewide Opihi rule. A single species, you might as well go for a larger area and have something comprehensive. And so they can realize the benefits of the, it would make more Opihi.
And it's worth mentioning what you know, Chris and Emily were sharing about earlier about the sort of wider East Maui efforts and other Opihi rest areas, is that, you know, this is, there is, you know, a lot of different communities that are looking at what they can do from a community level to try to be proactive and take the initiative for nearshore resource management. And, you know, when we talk about East Maui, a lot of times we think of the 4 mokus going to Kīpahulu, but really Kahiki Nui can certainly be included in that. So as we move forward, you know, if there's an interest in working on this stuff in Kahiki Nui, we'd be happy to like connect with folks out there and talk about how we can, you know, how we can all work together, because Kahiki Nui faces all the same kind of challenges, and, you know, every place has their unique kind of challenges, but we also share a lot in common across all the different mokus of Maui Hikina. And we can be stronger if we work together.
Agreed, most definitely. Is there any other questions? And feel free to unmute yourself as well if you want to ask. Kahiki Nui is interested in working together.
Great, let's follow up on that.
Yeah. I want to mahalo everyone for coming on tonight, and thank you to our speakers for sharing this mana'o with everyone. Our next speaker series is going to be June 16th, so please look out on Maui Nui Makai Network's social media, and definitely you can go to the website and register to get updated through email. But our next speaker will be announced soon. So want to mahalo everyone for coming on, and to our speakers as well. And we will see you on June 16th. Aloha. Anu makahewa ke la